Hello, welcome everyone as you're joining us. Welcome to the Wellness in the Law panel. It's Wednesday evening and we're halfway through our Careers Academy week, which has been very exciting. So we've got a wonderful panel for you this evening, and there's the opportunity for you to pop your own comments and thoughts in the chat, and down the bottom you'll also see there's a question and answer box as well. So feel free to put questions in there as well. My name is Jackie Owen. I'm the Relationship Manager based in Queensland, and I'd like to welcome you from whatever part of this big, beautiful land that we live in. For those that are coming to us from lockdown in whatever state, I hope that you are all doing well. And this is certainly probably a very timely discussion to tune into as we go into lockdown 6.0 or 7.0, whatever count you happen to be up to at this moment. It is tough for a lot of people out there. So welcome. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which you happen to be sitting on, and the land that we are all sitting on as the panel as well, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples make to the legal profession. So what we might do is get started and launch into our chat about wellness in the law. And as I said before, please do feel free to put your own questions in the question and answer box. The panel can see those comments as well, or there is the chat box as well. So I'd like to hand over to my colleague Graham Haas, who's a senior lecturer at the College of Law in Queensland, and he's going to be introducing you to our esteemed panel, Rachel Last, who's coming to us from the Sunshine Coast, and she is a graduate of the College of Law, having done her practical legal training with us, and also the wonderful Tracy Bowen coming to us from Brisbane, and she is just walking out the door at USQ. She's the current president of the Law Student Society up there, and she will be coming to us to do practical legal training in September. So thank you and welcome. I'll slip off. I'll be here if you need me. Feel free to pop your comments and chat into the appropriate means, and I'll hand over to Graham to start the discussion. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you kindly, Jackie. Welcome, everybody. Just you might want to put in the chat box. Let us know where you are today. Put a little comment on the chat box as to which town or city you might be in, so we can get a feel for where you all might be from around the country. And as Jackie said, yeah, we're all thinking of you, especially those who are in lockdown at the moment and doing it tough. Hopefully we can take your mind away from things for a little while. Yeah, we've got one in Brisbane there. But very lucky to be joined by my good buddies, Rachel and Tracy. We're not going to speak at you for an hour about generalities about wellness or resilience or mental health. What we've got is two people who are very much going to share their own stories with you and talk about their own journey and their own battles and progress they've made along the way. So we're really lucky to have you both here today, Rachel and Tracy. What have we got here? We've got people from, lots of Brisbane people. Oh, mainly Brisbane at this stage. We've got some Victorians down there as well. Maclean and New South Wales. Welcome, everybody. Please, as you go through, don't hesitate. Canberra as well. Don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat box. If you've got a question, chances are other people might have that same question. So please, I'm going to chat a little bit with Rachel and Tracy about their stories. But what we'd love to do is spend a lot of time responding to any questions or queries you might have as we go through. So please don't hesitate. Rachel, how are you going up there on the Sunshine Coast?
Good. I'm good. I am fortunate. No lockdown up here at the moment. So I'm doing it a lot better than many in our country at the moment.
Absolutely. And where are you today, Tracy?
I'm in Brisbane. We've just come out of quarantine and we're enjoying not being in lockdown now, but my thoughts are with the rest of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. We're thinking of you, everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about the mental health journey and what we've been through. For a lot of us, it starts early on, or for most people, the mental health problems will start early on. We're talking mid-teens, if not earlier sometimes. So that was certainly the case for me. I went and lived in Japan for a year and did a student exchange over there, and it was just severe culture shock. And I just remember having to get up and leave my classroom and go and throw up in the bathroom from time to time. time, but we never had any idea. Nobody ever mentioned anxiety or mental health or anything, or stress or anything like that. So I was completely lost as to what was going on there until years ago. So for me, I tend to be a worrier. Some people have tendencies towards depression, or others, it tends to be anxiety and depression that we're battling with. Sometimes it's both. And then sometimes you throw in a substance abuse issue to self-medicate and try and manage that yourself. So for me, it kicked in pretty early. How about yourself, Rachel? When did you first, or when looking back, when do you think that things started to kick in?
Similar for yourself, I have to admit, when you really look back on it, I think it went undiagnosed in teenage years. There was definitely some experiences when I was 16, 17, when you look back on it and you go, yeah, there was definitely a pretty severe level of depression going on back then that I suppose most people just put down to teenage hormonal years, and you'll get through that period, you're just being a teenager. But yeah, that was my first experience with it, and it didn't really rear its ugly head again until I was at university studying law, obviously in that high pressure vacuum that everyone would be well aware of.
It'll do it to you. They say that within 2 months of starting university, our rates of anxiety and depression increase significantly across the board for all uni students, but even more highly for lawyers as well. So, which means we all need to be doing something about that and dealing with that head on. So, credit to you all for coming along today and listening in on this one. Tracy, how about you? How old do you reckon you were when your battle started?
I think I can identify with what Rachel said, and I think I probably had some anxiety issues in my teen years, particularly with academic pressure and finishing high school, but they did culminate around my early 20s and then lasted probably until my mid-30s.
Yeah. So it really became acute, or the symptoms became a bit more severe in the early 20s for you? Yes,
it was a very acute period. I had anorexia nervosa for 12 years. So yes, it was a very acute and prolonged illness.
So an eating disorder, and that was perhaps related to other things behind that, I think you've said previously.
Absolutely. I think, a lot of law students will identify with this. I think a lot of us are perfectionists, and it stemmed from not being able to control everything. And so that became the forum in which I could exert control. And unfortunately, a mental illness such as anorexia is cyclic. So the more ill you become, the more anxious you become, and then depression is thrown into the mix as well. So it's a terrible
slippery
cycle.
Old slope.
It is a terrible cycle.
So what about you, Rachel? When do you think, you talked about the teenage years, but then university is when it really took off. What sort of symptoms did you see then?
The biggest thing through university was just seeing those little slow creeping, symptoms that you start to get, where you start to experience that panic around, your big assessment times, and you really start to find yourself comparing everything that's happening in your university studies with everyone around you. Why didn't I get that, that level of that mark? Why is, why are my assignment marks not as high as that person? Why can that person struggle their full-time work and their studies and achieve higher grades than me? Why can't I do that? And it was definitely, that negativity on myself, and it's a slow creeper, and it does slowly, infect all of your life. And definitely that panic and the anxiety was probably something that I didn't have a name for at that time. That really wasn't something that I ever appreciated fully until even later, to be honest. I didn't really understand that anxiety was, obviously, as you know, it goes hand in hand with depression in most cases. And I didn't quite appreciate how much the anxiety was dictating so much of my life through university. And it wasn't until later that I looked back on it and went, oh, wow, all of that panic and all of that, heightened emotion and the racing heart and the sweating and just not being able to think straight. You can't get your thoughts in any kind of logical order. That was something that I was experiencing back through uni, and I just didn't have that name for it.
The effect on your sleep, on your eating.
Yeah, all of it. Probably the biggest thing for me is I went through a relationship breakdown while I was studying law, and it was only really when I went through that and my depression really hit me again in a big way, I couldn't barely get myself together. I was tearful all the time. I had really lost hope. I really just didn't know. I didn't know what to do.
How long do you think that went on for? How long did you endure that?
I endured that probably for a good 6 to 8 months before I actually sought some help. Fortunately, a family member actually was the one that said to me, you're not quite pulling yourself out of this. I think you need to get some help. I think you need to go and talk to someone. And when they said that, of course, it was really upsetting, having someone say that when you do know that yourself that you're not being yourself anymore. But having someone else acknowledge it was very confronting, but it was the step that I needed because it prompted me to go and start talking with our mental health services at the university and going and talking with my GP, getting the help that I needed. For me, it was a combination of counselling and medication, and it was a long process and one I'm still battling it.
How do you reckon, and we'll talk about that, but you say when it was suggested to you that you weren't coping and that upset you, in what way do you think that upset you, or why were you upset? What was going on in your head then?
You just hold yourself out to such a high standard and you expect that you're going to be able to get past these things on your own. You always think that, you should be absolutely impervious to all of these things, and that's just not the case. We're all human. We're all going to experience these things, and what affects one person in one way will affect another in a completely different way. So
absolutely,
there's no logic or reason for mental health.
Well said. And that's one of the key themes, I think, is that, yes, we are all human beings, okay? We spend a lot of time with our studies and the practice of law trying to be objective, but guess what? And be professional too, because, you can't have as a professional, you're expected to be able to have a certain amount of self-control and control your emotions, but inside we're human beings who can really be battling away with things. So we all got to give ourselves permission to be human and keep an eye out for those times where we're being honest with ourselves. We really are struggling and we need that help. Tracy, for you, I know you were going through some fairly severe symptoms and to the point where it was you had yourself an eating disorder that you were dealing with there, and that must have come to a head at some point.
It did. It came to a head several times. And just going from what Rachel said previously, I think one of the reasons that I didn't seek help earlier was the stigma of having to ask for assistance. And that is why I speak about mental health issues, is to try and reduce that stigma. But yes, it did come into a head. I'd lost a significant amount of weight. I was experiencing physical health issues as well as mental health issues as a result. And my parents impressed upon me the need to see my GP regularly. And then my GP referred me on to a psychiatrist. That was a lengthy journey to find a psychiatrist who was a good fit for me. A
trial and error?
Yes, absolutely.
How many do you reckon you saw before you found one?
4 or 5.
Yeah.
4 or 5.
And the previous ones just didn't feel like the right fit to you?
No, they didn't feel like the right fit. And for me, when I'm encouraging somebody to see a psychiatrist or helping somebody to find one, I think you need to imagine it a little bit like, finding a friend. If it's somebody that you're comfortable speaking with, then you will really share what's going on with you internally. Whereas if it's somebody you might feel intimidated by or not connecting with, you're not going to share those very private thoughts.
Don't have that trust.
No.
Yeah.
And trust is implicit in a relationship like that.
So what triggered you? So it was your parents that encouraged you to go and have a chat with a GP?
My parents and then my daughter's father. After I'd given birth, I'd been seeing a GP for years, but after I'd given birth to my daughter, my weight plummeted to 43 kilos.
Wow.
And I think I narrowly missed being admitted to a hospital, but I was very lucky to find a doctor at the New Farm Eating Disorder Clinic in Brisbane who was able to assist me. And it's a long journey out as well as a long journey through it too, Graham.
What would you, absolutely. I mean, it's a work in progress for all of us as we travel on down the road. What would you say to somebody who might be listening to this thinking, you know, people have said things or things have been mentioned about me potentially having issues with my diet or with my eating? What might you say to someone, signs to keep an eye out for, things that would suggest that they need to have a chat with someone?
I would say I think they already know what's going on, Graham, and I would encourage them to seek help as soon as possible. Talk to a friend, talk to a GP, talk to a family member, because the journey that I went through with anorexia, I feel robbed me of a good 10 years of my life.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to see that happen to any person of whatever age. And I do see a lot of young law students who subject that perfectionism that we experience in our studies also upon themselves. And to find things that are good about yourself that have nothing to do with your appearance. You know, your body is a vehicle through which you travel through life, and it doesn't have to be perfect, you know. And yes, that's what I would say.
Just finding peace with yourself. So that's the big step. And the most recent surveys suggest that something like 20% of the population in any given year might have stats like that rolling around, might have some form of mental illness. But most people with a mental illness won't actually go and get that help. So that's one of the biggest battles that we have, is actually going and having a chat with a GP and connecting yourself with help. And there's lots of reasons. So if people listening to this are reluctant to go and have a talk with somebody, just be honest with yourself as to the reasons why. If it's the stigma, well, what would you say to that, Rachel? If someone's saying, well, I'm going to be judged in the workplace, how am I going to get a job? I'll have to disclose it on admission. My friends and family will think that I'm weak and I can't cope. What would you say to somebody about that stigma?
It definitely exists. I'm never going to lie to people and say that there is no stigma, and we've managed to reduce that down to absolutely zero. That stigma definitely exists. I've faced it. I've faced employers that have said things to me like, oh, well, don't worry about that person that's bullying you in the workplace. That's just your anxiety talking. You're just overly sensitive to it.
Okay, no insight whatsoever.
No insight whatsoever. Whereas, other employers have been really open about mental health and wellbeing. I think it's just finding a place that fits well with your own values. And if it is something that you feel that, you're passionate about it, or you feel that it needs to be addressed, I always say, just talk about it. Just talk about it until it's reducing the stigma a little bit at a time. I always say that. I say it to Jackie from College of Law. I refuse to not talk about it just because it might make one person out of a group of 5 uncomfortable, because 4 out of that group of 5 do want to hear what you have to say, and probably have struggled themselves because of the rates of mental illness now, especially in our profession. Most people that you're talking to who you think might have some sort of preconceived stigma about it probably have experienced it themselves. They just haven't been.
Really well said. And as I say to people, dinosaurs walk the earth, and sometimes they're partners in law firms and employers, and they can have really backwards maladaptive attitudes to mental health. And you'll hear them say things like, as they said to Rachel just then, but also things like, harden up, take a teaspoon of cement, get over it. When I was a young grad, I dealt with it. If the kitchen's too hot, get out of the kitchen. And all of that is really just saying, I don't understand mental health. I just power on, and I don't really have much insight into these issues. So if you're hearing that stuff out there, people, and we hear lots of it, the stigma's still there. The studies tell us that the stigma is reducing, and it has reduced significantly. At the college, we've trained something like 30,000 students in relation to mental health and resilience. They now have gone on to be associates and partners. So the profession is getting smarter, and I think broadly as a society, we're getting smarter. So just be able to recognise when people out there have unhealthy attitudes, and don't take that to heart. We've got some awesome questions coming in. So why don't we deal with one of those questions? Does having a diagnosed condition affect someone holding a practicing certificate? Would you need a GP to certify that someone is fit to hold one? Well, my understanding of that one, and Tracy, Rachel, you might want to add to it, but my understanding, and it differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction because it's a law society or admissions body issue. But consistently what I find is this: if you go to a doctor and see them for depression or anxiety, that's not going to stop you from being able to practice. Okay, the law societies each have their own disclosure obligations that vary from state to state. So I'd suggest doing a search on your particular state's disclosure obligations. But generally, what they say is that if it's not affecting your ability to practice, okay, then it's certainly not going to, or it may not require disclosure, and it's certainly not going to affect your practicing certificate. I think the last time I checked, LPAB wanted disclosure of mental health issues when you're going for admission, but that never comes up in court. What they're really concerned about, in my experience, is people with psychosis or people who have psychotic episodes who've been prescribed medication and have decided that that medication isn't for them, and they'll be right. That's, in my experience, that's when I've seen people have issues. But certainly getting help, going to a doctor is something that all the law societies want you to do. Hey, they've got their law care set up, generally speaking. So I would encourage you all in the strongest terms to go and have a chat with somebody, get that help, because these things don't fix themselves up. You know, if I break my leg tomorrow, then I'm not just going to sit on the couch and go, she'll be right, it'll sort itself out in time. We need to go and be brave enough to put trust in people to help us out. I don't know, Rachel or Tracy, if you had any different takes on that.
Yeah, I always say, if in doubt, disclose it. When you're going for admission, if in any doubt, disclose it, because all they'll do is tell you that it's an irrelevant point, or just not worry about it altogether. Same thing applies for any little criminal offences, any little driving offences or anything like that. Always best to err on the side of caution and just disclose it, and have them, think that it's irrelevant to your application. But in the grand scheme of things, I haven't read any cases about it preventing someone from being admitted. So I wouldn't be concerned about it, being a roadblock to admission.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think there's any other option but to go and have a chat with somebody, because things tend to compound over time. Things tend to get worse before they get better if they're untreated. So
yeah, absolutely. We do have some extra questions, Graham, just in the chat function. We've got some questions that have been rolling in. One of the questions was whether we can touch on imposter syndrome at all, which I think is a great question, because it is certainly something that you experience in your first years when you get into practice and you come into it, and suddenly, you're just waiting for the day that someone figures out that you snuck through the cracks somehow, and you surely can't be a lawyer, and surely you're not qualified to do this. I find that experience really happened myself, and I spoke with other law graduates who were starting out, and they definitely experienced the same thing. They're just, looking over their shoulder, waiting for someone to figure out that they shouldn't be there. You don't know, you don't belong here. I definitely think that that's something that we experience, especially with mental illness, because you do end up, doubting yourself, and that self-doubt and that, lack of confidence and the lack of self-esteem is something that, tags along with a lot of mental illness. So I think that is part of that reason for that imposter syndrome.
As a recent law graduate, I've got to say that imposter syndrome is also really prevalent, even as an undergrad. And I really identify with what Rachel said. You just wait. Like, I'm graduating with distinction, and I spent most of the degree thinking, I wonder if anybody's going to find out soon that I don't know anything, that I'm just faking my way through this. And there is a real sense of that. And I think, you need to really reassure yourself that everybody else is probably feeling this way, and to try and engender a culture of, applauding one another for, getting that credit, getting that distinction, getting that HD, making it through with whatever GPA you got. It is people do tend to compete in law school, but perhaps by, supporting one another rather than just focusing on that competitive mentality, we may be able to dissolve a part of that as well.
Do you consider yourself to be a perfectionist, Tracy, or have those tendencies?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how do you counter that? You still feel it now?
Yes. Yeah, I feel it now. So I make a note daily to remind myself of the need to be mindful of my imperfections, and to acknowledge that that's okay. That
Absolutely.
I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to be the perfect person for everyone. That people aren't going to like me. And that's all right. I'm happy with who I am, by and large, and I need to, focus on the good things that I can do and acknowledge the bad, because, we are all imperfect human beings.
Well said. I reckon if everybody likes you and you don't have people that dislike you, you're not doing it properly. You got to try harder. So, what about you, Rachel? How do you battle that war against perfection?
I'm still learning. I really do struggle with that perfectionist tendency, and taking too long to do a task because I'm trying to get it perfect, trying to get it right, and learning very quickly that there's no time in practice for that, and you need to hurry up and get it done and get it out.
Efficiency is everything.
That's very tough. I think the biggest thing for me was getting a mentor that I could go to, and they were sort of guiding me through that and encouraging me when to move on and when to leave it be, and having that guidance from someone who was a bit more senior than me in a law firm, I think was the biggest thing.
Brilliant. I've sent through a YouTube link, and it's just that Amy Cuddy TED Talk. If you haven't watched it, watch it. It's absolutely brilliant. And at the end, she talks about that very issue of imposter syndrome. And her comment is, fake it until you become it. But the way there's 10 minutes of science and then 10 minutes of her very own story. But it's incredibly moving, and I commend that to you. In relation to the perfectionism, I think it's probably worth a quick chat if you'll indulge me, because I think it's so important. It's something that people need to understand. Generally, what it entails is this: you set an unreasonable expectation for yourself, and that is perfection. So you set the bar so high that it's going to be probably unattainable, okay? And you try to reach that goal, and lo and behold, is perfection unrealistic, not going to happen. And we tend to have a negative self-talk. You don't reach that goal, and then you start saying to yourself, well, this just goes to show I'm not good enough. I'm not up to scratch. I'm not worthy. I don't belong here. I'm not smart enough, whatever it might be. So you start to beat yourself up, because your self-identity and self-esteem is very much tied in with this high achievement and the unreasonable expectations, okay? When we do reach those goals, guess what? We don't tend to, if you do reach perfection every now and then, guess what? You don't tend to enjoy it, because you're going to have to do it next time, or you should have aimed a little bit higher this time. So the perfectionist sets this unreasonable expectation, and the key is their self-identity and self-esteem is tied up in achieving these goals. They suggest that it goes back to our childhood and lessons we learn from our parents and the people around us, that our value as human beings, or mum and dad love us when we take home a good report card, or we play the violin well, or we play a good game of soccer. So it tends to get programmed into us at a very early age, where we start to think that my value as a human being revolves around all of this high achievement and getting good grades and being able to play the piano and whatever it might be. But guess what? When we toddle off this earth and people are standing around remembering us and what we were like, I don't think many people will be standing around going, gee, I miss Graham. He could really fill out those timesheets, and the way he drafted pleadings, God, I wish he was here now. Just an affidavit, one more affidavit from Graham, and that would have been awesome. The people that matter to us in our life, our friends and family and the people that care about us, they don't care about that stuff. They care about who we are as human beings and our personal qualities. Compassion, kindness, sense of humor, patience, tolerance. So one thing I would suggest to you all is remind yourself as often as you possibly can, I am who I am, not what I do. Okay, so being able to differentiate between what we do at work and what we do in our studies and our worth as human beings is really, really important. You're not going to be able to throw off this perfectionism coat or jacket and be done with it forever, but by understanding how it works and applying some strategies, you'll get much better at managing it, I think. Does that sound kind of familiar to you, Rachel and Tracy?
Yeah, definitely.
It does. And just because, Rachel said she's still going through the journey, I didn't want to make it seem like I've reached some sort of non-perfectionism euphoria. I think the important thing is to remember, yes, I still want a 7. Yes, I still want to be, the brightest in the room. And I think we all want that. But what I remind myself of when I'm not the brightest in the room, when I'm not achieved the highest mark, that's all right. It's all right. It's great that I tried.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are our own harshest critic.
Yes.
Yeah. And so for a lot of you all, it starts at the beginning of the day, doesn't it? When you're lying in bed and before you get out of bed. And what's your attitude to the day ahead? Are you dreading it? Is it terrifying? Is it sink or swim? Okay. And that's and a lot of that leads to anxiety, I think, when we wake, or a Sunday night when you know you've got work the next day, or Monday morning, you might be on in court and you get up early, or you guys might have some exams coming up or some assessments and you're falling behind and you're procrastinating. So I think it really starts at the beginning of the day, and you can either dread the day that's ahead of you and you can see it as a threat or something that might sink you or feel like you're under attack, in which case our body physiologically responds to that by the anxiety, by the fight or flight. Okay. Alternatively, you can get up in the morning and you can reframe it and say, hey, I've got a challenge ahead of me today. This is going to be fun. I've got opportunities. I've got challenges. And if you see the day as an opportunity and challenge and something that's fun, or something that's potentially enjoyable or worthwhile, then you're physiologically going to respond to it very, very differently. So one thing we can try, and as I say, it's just as much a work in progress for me as anybody else. Don't worry about that. But when I wake up in the morning, I'm trying to program myself now. No, you're scared of the day ahead, but you've got opportunities here. There are things that may come from this. See it as a challenge. You guys think about going and playing sport or a chess game or knitting a jumper or things that you find challenging but fun. Wouldn't it be great if we could have more of that attitude to our work and our studies, see it as opportunities and see it as challenges, not as a threat? So let's go back to Rachel. We've talked a little bit about and I know we got questions coming through and we will get to those, but just a little bit more about Rachel and Tracy's story. So you got to a point where you needed to go and get some help. You went off to a GP?
Yes, I did. Yeah, went off to my GP, just sat down and just said to them, I don't know what's wrong with me. I cannot pull myself out of this slump that I'm in. I can't, I'm teary. I feel so low and I don't know how to pull myself back out of this. And yeah, I just started talking and
how did that feel?
Kind of come out.
How did it feel when finally you got to a doctor and said all these things?
Confronting, very confronting. And just start acknowledging it and to start giving it a name is to make it real. And I think that that's really scary when you're experiencing something. The tendency is obviously to push it down and try and ignore it and think,
denial.
I'll get over this. I'll get past it myself. I don't want to talk to someone. I don't need medication. I don't want to go down the path. But when you start talking, when you start acknowledging it and you give it a name, the first instinct is to be scared by that.
But when did you first start noticing some progress or thinking that going and seeing a GP and getting some help might have been a useful step in the right direction?
I think the biggest thing for me was I was put on some medication. I was put on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. I felt that pulled me up a lot higher than speaking with someone at the time. I realized later that I didn't have a good relationship with the counsellor I was going to, and I needed to find someone better for me.
Absolutely.
Like Tracy said, it's it's a very personal relationship. In that instance, the medication helped. I sat on it. It wasn't working. I changed to a different one. Eventually, I just started to just start to feel like myself again. And you'd wake up in the morning and you'd get up and you'd get on with your day, and
it felt good.
And you'd kind of go, I had a bit of a normal week. I feel like myself again. Suddenly that whole person that I was that felt so far removed from who I normally am, feels like it's a little further away now.
That weight that you were carrying around was no longer there.
Yeah, and just doesn't feel as heavy, a little bit at a little bit. It's certainly not overnight. It took a long time to come out of it. And I've had another episode after being in legal practice. And again, that one took me even longer to come out of, and I really struggled.
So for some people, particularly when the issue's acute early on, they might put you on some medication, but medication can have some profoundly positive impacts on people, particularly sometimes it's a long-term thing, sometimes it might just be a short-term thing. Sometimes they'll do blood tests and find out your serotonin levels are off or something. And so that certainly happened with friends of mine. They wait until their 50s before they did anything about it, got some blood tests, and God, It's just the something's off in the blood. So, yep, you might have some medication. What about CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT? Was that rolled out at all?
It wasn't, not until much later down the track that I started properly going and seeing a psychologist and probably working through everything, just everything. You don't even realise the things that you've been holding on to until you start talking.
Yep.
And I was always one of those people that I was quite against going talking to a therapist. It felt
Why do you think?
strange, and I didn't want to talk to a stranger about my problems.
Vulnerability.
It was vulnerable, and also I just thought I'd rather talk to a friend than a therapist. This is what I have friends for. I don't want to let this person in to my life. Like you said, it's vulnerability. I just imagined that therapist relationship where they sit there and go, why do you think that is? And it's not at all what it is. That's not what the process is like. So I was very pleasantly surprised when, my therapist challenged me and asked the tough questions and turned things around and made me think of things in a different light.
Gave you some strategies that you could roll out and start using.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Tracy, what about yourself? You finally took the plunge, were connected with a GP and a psychologist. Well, I think about everybody. If you decide to go to a GP yourself, or you're having a chat with somebody and they're going to go and have a chat with a GP about a mental health issue, book in an extended consultation. Don't just go in for your bulk bill, 5 minutes in and out. Book in that extended consultation. You may well be put on a mental health plan, particularly if the issues are acute. You might be put on a mental health plan, but that's good because you've now made it somebody else's problem. Somebody who's qualified can now help you. There's nothing. It's like when people dump their problems on us as lawyers. Well, every now and then we have to be vulnerable and give somebody else the opportunity to deal with the problem. So, book in for that extended consultation, and you may be put on a mental health plan, but if you are, there are funding benefits there, and the government will subsidise visits to psychologists and that sort of thing to help you out down the track. So, Tracy, you finally made it to a GP, and you were then referred on to a psychologist. What sort of what helped you through that period?
I used a little bit of everything. So I had seen psychologists, counsellors, psychiatrists. I was on antidepressants for a long period of time, and I think about 9 years. And eventually, for me, it was a combination of cognitive behaviour therapy, gentle exercise every day in the mornings to raise endorphins.
CBT, sorry, back to the CBT, but just changing your attitudes to yourself and your behaviours, is that sort of thing?
The CBT that helped me was a lot of positive self-talk, Graham. So rather than, for instance, you're not good enough if you don't fit into a size 6, it's you're a really kind person. You're a really lovely friend, that sort of thing. So that I took the focus from one area of my life to another. So it wasn't so internalized.
I love that, because all of us, I reckon, and most people probably listening in today, if you really tune into what your relationship with yourself and your self-talk, it can be scary the way we talk to ourselves. So we need to put on a different record there or a different program and start playing something that's not going to crush us as the day goes on. Hey,
but I think medication is really valuable.
Yeah, for some people on an ongoing basis, and for some people in the short term, I suspect too.
Absolutely, and I don't think there should be any stigma attached. I know that there is still a little with taking that type of medication, because there's no stigma attached to using insulin.
What I say to everybody is, listen, you got a right to enjoy your days. Life's short. We've got a limited time here on earth. So if you're getting up every day and you feel flat and you can't get out of bed and there's no joy in your day, and you'll feel like you're withdrawing socially and you feel lousy about yourself, well, that could suggest there's issues with depression there. There's some of the classic signs of depression, just not enjoying the things that you used to enjoy. With the anxieties, it's that sense of fear. It's fight or flight. I'm under attack here. It's the adrenaline and the cortisol pumping around your body. Okay. So from time to time, fair enough, happens to the best of us. But if this is what's happening to you on a daily basis, week after week, then you really want to be brave enough to put your hand up and go and have a chat with somebody. It's not going to affect your ability to practice. It won't be disclosed on admission. When I go to the admission ceremonies up here, I mean, you might disclose it to LPAB or Law Society, but it's not going to come before the court necessarily, or be referred to when they make their judgments. So we've got a couple of questions. Shall we start looking at some questions so we don't run out of time? I have a panic disorder, OCD, relate to what was said about the feelings of panic. Okay, so potential anxiety related issues there. And the question for you, I suspect, Rachel, is, has your mental illness affected your job performance? And have you noticed your mental illness being negatively affected by your work?
Yes and yes, absolutely. I'll be really honest with people and say that, law is not an industry that you get into lightheartedly. It's hard. It's hard. It's not an easy industry to be in. It is hard on your energy levels. It's hard on your body when you're sitting at a desk all day long. It's hard on your mind, and it's definitely hard on your mental health. I think that I was coping quite well with my mental health towards the end of uni. I got admitted, I got into legal practice, and again, just that overwhelming uncertainty over what I was doing, that imposter syndrome, and just feeling completely out of my depth. Instead of, people saying that, oh, you jump in and it's sink or swim, I was sinking, and I was sinking fast. And it was as a result of the pressure of the job. So I definitely understand what people say when they say that it's the job that does it for their mental illness. For me, that's a daily battle, because obviously I don't want to give up working as a lawyer. I want to keep going in this career, and I want to go up and get, go bigger and better. But I certainly don't want my mental health to hold me back from doing that. So for me now, it is just this absolute tightrope balancing act of trying to stay ahead of my mental health, being really across what the early warning signs are for me. And for me, it's, it's the teariness, it's the being overwhelmed and feeling that panic set in, and just suddenly feeling like everything on my plate that I have to do is bigger
catastrophe.
Than me. Yeah, it's all bigger than me, and I can't past it. And when I start having those days, and those days are rolling into another day and another day, and it's a week after a week, and I start going, I think I'm starting to struggle.
Yep.
And it's only because I suffer from recurrent depression and anxiety that I now have the insight to recognize when I'm struggling. And that's taken me a long time to get to that point. But that's important if I want to keep practicing in this industry. I not only have to be, equipped with the coping tools of how to get past these things when they're happening, but I have to be able to recognize when they're happening and when they're getting ahead of me.
And go and get some help.
Absolutely.
Is it something you can manage yourself, or you go and get some help and get somebody to look after you?
My latest episode, I went and got some help. And I did go back on my medication. I generally, I'm not one that I stay on it. I go back on it, pull myself out of my slump, and try to remind myself of all of those coping techniques, and just be kind to myself. And a big thing is when I'm starting to panic and I'm starting to get to that point where everything feels like it's piling up and I'm about to lose control completely, is, one of my mentors might walk past my office and they can see me in a panic, and they go, mate, how do you eat an elephant? It's too big to fit it in your mouth all at once, but one bite at a time, and it's doable. And it's a terrible analogy, but it actually works for me, because
break it up into smaller bits, otherwise it's not manageable.
Exactly. Every time I think, oh my God, I've got so much to plate, I've got so much to do, I'm never going to get it all done, I start to panic, and suddenly I feel like I'm a terrible lawyer. I'm absolutely crap at my job. What am I doing? I can't do this job anymore. I don't belong here. I just remember that and just go one bite at a time. Just pick up the next job.
Well said.
Pick up the next job and do it, and then pick up the next one after that. But sorry, I got off topic.
No, not at all. I want to jump in there because
Christian, yes, the job affects my mental health, and my mental health affects my job. Definitely,
absolutely, they're tied together.
They're tied together. Not a lot of industries will do that to you, but law is definitely that high pressure industry where we're constantly holding ourselves out to perfection, and we're constantly we have deadlines and we have pressures on us all the time, and that's going to affect your mental health. You just have to be aware that it's going to, and be prepared for when it does, and recognize it and get the help and do those steps that you need to follow in order to get past it.
Absolutely. On the topic of elephants, so for those of you who are dealing with university work or other things and you've got an elephant there in front of you, here is my suggestion. You need to come up with a plan. Time management is so critical for you. Do it every day. You can do it before you go to bed at night and probably sleep a little bit better. Come up with a plan for the next day. But what you want to do is write a list of what you have to do, estimate time for each of those tasks, and then come up with a timetable for your day. Particularly students, one of the challenges for students is that they see the 24 hours a day is potentially study time. So that gives you a green light to procrastinate. Why would you do something and get it out of the way in the morning when you can procrastinate your way through the day and do it in the afternoon? So good tip for students is come up with a timetable, treat it like a job, 9 to 5, plan your day so that you're going to be more disciplined, procrastinate less, work more efficiently, and critically take control over that day. Just that act of taking control and timetabling your day and what you're going to do is going to make you feel a whole lot better. Rachel, we've talked about some of we don't want to be scaring people away from the profession, but people have decided to go and study law. It's not flipping burgers. Yeah, there's a real challenge to it. But the hardest part of the job is if you stuff things up, then you're going to have a profound impact on people's lives. That's one of the worst parts of the job. But the great part of the job is that you can have a profound impact on people's lives. What do you really love about being a lawyer, Rachel?
Exactly that. You've hit the nail on the head. I'm fortunate that the area of law that I've just, ended up in, I'm helping people on the daily who have been injured. So there's nothing quite like that experience when I get to the end of a claim and I've changed someone's life for the better. And having that experience just reminds you how much of a profound effect you can have. But, absolutely correct. Yes, a mistake in law can have huge consequences. But we are human and we do make mistakes. I have stuffed up more times than I can count, and big ways. I've made big mistakes before. And my biggest thing that I would say to people is it's rare that you're going to come across a career-ending mistake. You would have to do something absolutely out of this world for it to be career-ending. Every mistake is fixable. You just need to acknowledge it and own it before it gets ahead of you. Yeah. I learned the lesson. I've made mistakes, and as soon as you realize your mistake, own it and go, I've made this mistake. I've stuffed up. I've walked into bosses' offices and I've gone, this is on me. I've made this mistake. I have no idea, how I did it, but it's completely on me. Can you help me fix it?
Well said. And
they're never going to hold it against you. You're not going to get them back doing that, because people make mistakes, and what they're actually going to appreciate is how you owned up to it. And
absolutely. So we've got
any learn from it.
We've got a comment here that flows on from that, Rachel. It might be all right for us to allow for failures, but your boss in a law firm or teachers in law schools don't permit for failures. One mistake your whole life is judged for the future. Well, my suggestion would be go and have a chat with those teachers and bosses, and you'll find out they've made their fair chunk of mistakes. It's how we learn.
I think what's really important there is, yes, other people will judge you for your mistakes. What's important when protecting your mental health, maintaining your mental health, is that you don't judge yourself for it. It's all right to make mistakes.
Absolutely. You're allowed to be human. I mean, for the creative, anybody who's undertaken any sort of creative work, I mean, you're not going to be able to create anything or make anything unless you're prepared to make mistakes and make stuff up. So otherwise, don't get out of bed in the morning, which is probably a grand mistake in itself. What else we got? I think there was another question hiding away here. Well, one other comment I wanted to make about work is that a good, healthy workplace and a job that you enjoy can have a profoundly positive impact on your mental health. It gives people a sense of purpose. It gives them a social community, gives them a steady income, gives them routine. So having a good job and working in a healthy workplace can actually be a really positive thing for your mental health as well. Yeah. What else? I don't know if you guys have spotted any questions there that we've missed.
Is a question just in relation to university classes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, in the first year of uni, doing Bachelor of Laws, diagnosed with some mental illnesses, getting really overwhelmed with the study load when you're in a tutorial, getting anxious when you're asked a question, feeling like you're not the smartest person in the class. Do you have any advice on how to overcome the stress and anxiety when it comes to uni?
Well, I might jump in early. If it's any consolation, that's right. That's me to a T. I taught PLT students for 5 years, and that first 5 years of teaching, I'd go read if somebody asked me a question and I was not confident about my answers. So yeah, we carry those anxieties and insecurities with us. One thing one strategy you can use is realistic thinking. So think of something that's causing you anxiety or fear or might be concerning you. Apologies for the vacuum cleaner coming out through the office of an evening in front of me. But they talk about realistic thinking. So you think about something that's causing you stress and you ask yourself, what's the worst case scenario here? What's the worst thing that could happen? We're very good at doing that. We nail that one. We like to catastrophize. So that first question we have down pat, what's the worst case scenario here? Then ask yourself, how likely is that? Because we can sort out worst case scenario, but we've got to be thinking realistically. How likely is that worst case scenario? Then thirdly, what's a more likely outcome? So where you find yourself getting caught up in stress and worry and catastrophizing, ask yourself those three questions. What's the worst case scenario? How likely is that? What's more likely to happen? You're not magically going to be running through green grassy hills of daffodils and singing songs, but it will take the sting out of that those fears and anxieties sometimes, I find anyway. And as we were saying before, just the things that you see as a threat, start seeing them as an opportunity or a challenge, an opportunity to prove yourself, learn, grow in your skills, grow in your abilities, and just that act of reframing turns it from a threat or something you're anxious about to something you can relish and enjoy. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Tracy.
I think something that's been really useful for me through both of my degrees is maintaining connections outside of the community that I'm studying in. So it's great that I'm a member of the Law Society. It's great that I've got law friends. It's great that I socialise with law friends. But I maintain commitments with friends who have nothing to do with law, who have family members who have no interest in law.
Perspective.
Yes. And maintaining that's been really, really important to me. And I also just wanted to speak briefly about maintaining mental health on a daily basis. As Rachel spoke about, realising that she was going through something regularly and then re-seeking assistance from a GP. I think it's really important to speak to your friends and close friends and family about how you're feeling. So if you've recovered from a bout of anxiety or depression, to say, I'm feeling a little bit sad today, because by sharing that information with somebody that you trust, it gives them the capacity to watch out for you as well. So that you're you're not so alone. If I feel like I'm being really hard on myself, I will tell my husband, I will tell my close friends, because I know if I don't speak about it, then I might go to a place where I stop communicating to others.
Internalize it all.
Exactly.
Yeah. It is incredibly therapeutic to be able to talk to people and say, hey, I'm actually struggling, instead of all of the energy we spend trying to mask it, I guess.
Absolutely. Being honest with your friends and your loved ones when you are feeling really down like that, being able to say to your partner, I've had a bad day. I'm not coping so well. I think I'm struggling more than I realized. I think I really need to be kind to myself, this weekend and just really recenter and regroup before next week. And, normalizing with your friends, talking about it. And, I've got a group of friends where we normalize just popping into our group chat. Are you okay? Just every now and again, and being honest with our answer and saying, yeah, I'm okay. I've had a stressful week. It's been pretty hard, but I think I'm on top of it. Or, yeah, I feel like things are really getting on top of me. I'm a bit down. I saw a client and their story really got to me. Or my boss is, being horrible if they are, being able to answer it honestly is what's important as well, because it's one thing to ask your friends, but you've got to have the trust there that you can give them an honest answer and they're going to listen.
Here's a strategy I would suggest to you all. When you're checking in with people and seeing how they're going, make them give you a number out of 10 and return the favor, because it makes people stop and think and go, oh, really? I'm a 4. And you get a better idea of how people are really traveling. If someone's a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or a 6, then they might need a bit of time and a bit of a chat. If they're an 8 or a 9, well, hopefully some of that rubs off on us. But yeah, get people to give you a mark out of 10, and it really cuts to the chase, and you can address head on how people are traveling.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what Tracy was saying there, interests outside of work, so important, because what will happen is if you're working the long days or you're studying all day long and that is your life and there's not much going on elsewhere, well, the smallest thing that happens at work or in your studies becomes huge. Fishbowl kicks in and these tiny things become massive problems. Whereas if you've got a broader network of friends and there are other things that you're doing outside of work, you're going to have a much broader perspective on life and how insignificant these things really can be in the long run. I mean, the things that ate me up years ago and would keep me awake at nights, I'd struggle to remember them, but at the time they're so important to you. But you just lose perspective, hey?
I think we need to remember too, Graham, that those things that you do outside of work or study don't need to be a huge time commitment. It can be a 20-minute walk in the morning. It can be 20 minutes of mindfulness while you're preparing dinner, so no screens on while you're cooking. And that time can be as valuable as thinking, oh, I wish I could go and spend 2 hours doing this. Because I do, when I speak to law students, they say, I don't have time for myself. And 2 20-minute sessions a day can be really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. As perfectionists and pessimists, we can have a really negative attitude to ourselves. So just reprogramming ourselves, as Tracy was saying, keep an eye on your self-talk, make it more positive. Acknowledge your wins. I mean, you guys have gotten this far in your studies. You've kicked a lot of goals along the way, but you may not be recognizing that or giving yourself credit for it. So go out of your way to appreciate and recognize the little wins you've had along the way and the things that you've done well. Do it on a daily basis instead of looking back on the day and thinking of all the things that were that you might have stuffed up or might get you sued or could have done better. Really look back on your days and go out of your way to think about what went well for me today, what made me feel good today, what was a positive thing about today. And you will start to set up neural pathways and get your brain thinking in a much more adaptive or positive way and getting functioning a whole lot better. So being kinder to ourselves, we're not beating ourselves up and the people around us, giving ourselves a break when we do make our mistakes and we fall over, learning from them, being able to laugh at ourselves. But it's a work in progress for all of us. So the fact that you guys have all tuned in tonight suggests that you've got a keen interest in this topic and you want to learn. Some of you are messaging about who do I speak with at the college. If you're having an issue, get in touch with your lecturer. I think the key contact is a person called Adrian Deans, perhaps in Sydney, where most of our student inquiries go. But certainly have a chat with your lecturer. We're always available. Or if there's a particular lecturer you've had assessments with or had a connection with, get in touch with them, because we'll certainly go out of our ways to help you out wherever we possibly can. Thanks to, it's getting close to going home time, so I'm not going to say much more other than big thanks to Rachel and Tracy. I'm coming through on the comments. I can see how much people appreciate it. You guys being brave enough to tell your stories, and we'll make sure you keep telling your stories too, because it has such a big impact on people to see that it's okay to be human. We're not robots. We make mistakes. We have good days and bad days. We beat ourselves up more than we should, but we've got to be brave enough to go and chat with somebody and get some help when we need that. So so much thanks and appreciation to you both. You're my heroes. Well done. Thank you.
And thank you very much to Graham as well. I've just been sitting here admiring you all and really enjoying everything that you've had to say. It's touched me, sort of in a personal way as well, with things going on in my own life. So I really do appreciate, everyone's got a different story to tell, but it's really powerful, I think, to come together and to use Tracy's expression that she said to me quite a few times, to normalize and not sit at home worrying that we're the only ones that are going through this. And if we come together, we can support each other. When one of us is up, another person might be down, and we can lift each other up when needed, with the appropriate professional help as well. So thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you very much, Tracy. And thank you very much to Graham as well for having such a powerful discussion and an important discussion. And yes, I think we can all take away the fact that we are all human. We will all have our ups and downs. We will make mistakes, but we will all, deal with things, get up the next day and do our very best again, and seek support and seek help. So thanks everyone. The comments, everyone's really been enjoying this discussion, and I'd like to wish everyone a lovely evening, and I hope that our audience can tune into other sessions coming for the rest of the week, but this has certainly been a highlight for me. So thank you very much. Good night, everyone, and I hope you have got a lot out of this discussion.
And we're on LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn. If you want to say hi to us or connect with us or have a chat, feel free to.
Absolutely. All four of us would love to receive your connections after this evening. Thanks,
Be kind
guys.
to yourselves, everyone.
Be kind, stay safe, and special thoughts going out to those in lockdown. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.